names so that they would feel very welcome. We got Dr. Kenrick Leslie, who is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. We call it the 4 Cs.
Come on, 5.
5 C's.
5 C's.
The 5 Cs, sorry. Yes. And then I'd like to introduce the Honorable Camille Robinson Regis, who is the Minister of Planning and Development of the Government of Trinidad and Tobago. And beside her is Pim van Vallencom, who is the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, making a major contribution to our region as well. Please welcome him. So the order today, and in cricketing terms, the opening bowler is none other than Dr. Kenrick Leslie of the 5 Cs. He will give us an overview of the work of that institution and lead off the charge to the region.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity of thanking the CDB once again for giving me the opportunity to talk about the work of the center, but more importantly, what's going on in terms of climate science, the framework in which we are working to address the issues of climate change, and to highlight some of the key institutions. I'm very pleased to say that my work, or my address this afternoon, has been helped, or will be helped significantly, because I have 2 of my colleagues here in the audience who will, and I assure you, will be ready to answer questions concerning the work that they're doing. I have Professor Taylor from the University of the West Indies Mona campus, who leads a very critical component in the research going on in terms of understanding climate change. I also have with me Mr. Adrian Trotman from the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology. And the reason for having these 2 gentlemen with us is because I want to start off by setting the base understanding of climate and climate change. You see, we talk about climate, but climate is what we have been accustomed to from the time we came on this earth. And we have superimposed on that climate variability. The work of the CIMH is addressing that part of it. And then we have climate change, which is a much broader subject that will affect and is affecting all aspects of human life and development and other biological issues on this earth. That is where we come into the work being done by the group at Mona in understanding the long-term changes, and that's where we say climate change. So I want to establish that there is a difference, but they are all equally important in terms of addressing climate change. And then we have the Climate Change Center, which is mandated by the governments to coordinate our work in terms of climate change. And this is, again, very broad because it deals with our negotiations, it deals with our policies that we use, and it deals in terms of implementing programs with support from our donors in addressing the issues of adaptation and mitigation. So with that said, I would like to first talk about the work of CIMH, and we will get into this in much more detail because, as I said, Mr. Trotman is here. But they have been doing work in addressing the issues of climate variability, how our industries, our farmers, especially the tourism industry, are affected from the day-to-day variations in our climate. For instance, one of the issues involved with climate change is that you will see from the work being done at Mona that droughts are becoming more frequent, rainfall are becoming more intense, and in other words, the extreme weather conditions are more frequent. And the CIMH work is addressing that issue. In terms of the work being done by Mona, they are doing the models that will take us through to the end of the 21st century, in decades and so on. In the global models, they look at 300 plus kilometers resolution. In the Caribbean, we would never see any of our islands. And even the big country of Guyana, you would only get a few dots. So the models being addressed on the global scale is of no use to us. The work being done by the climate group in Mona have reduced that 300 kilometers to 50, 25, and we are going further down to 10, and so on, so we can see what is happening in our watersheds, our coastal areas, and so on. So that work is extremely important. But a very important aspect of their work at this point in time is the understanding the impacts of that 2-degree that was approved by the UNFCCC at the Paris Agreement. At the Paris Agreement, the world concluded that we should strive to maintain our temperature below 2 degrees. That is not what we want in the Caribbean. We want a 1.5 because above that, we will suffer serious consequences. And with the support of CDB, for the first time, the group is doing research that will be peer-reviewed, that it can get into the IPCC program that is coming up. So this is one of the areas that the CDB is playing a very critical role. I will expand on this, but I was asked to be limited in my first opening remarks. But this is an area, and in other areas where CDB has been playing a very critical role in allowing the Center, CIMH, the University of the West Indies, SEDEMA, and other institutions to help us address the issues of climate change. I will pause at this point in time and then come back to address in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, let's then bring Cheryl Dixon into the picture. She has a special presentation that certainly gives a background to the latest research conducted on behalf of the Caribbean Development Bank.
Thank you, Julian. I think Thank you. Thank you, Julian. Dr. Leslie has certainly started where I had intended to start, which is to talk about the impacts of climate change on our borrowing member countries. As he says, I need not dwell on this. We have far more competent people in the audience who will speak to that. But what I would like to say is that the most recent UNFCCC report says very clearly that the climate is changing. Our countries in the Caribbean are already feeling the impact of this change. These are impacts that have significant implications for our continued growth and development, and that significant resources will be required to address these challenges. From the perspective of the bank, it is important for us to understand the role that our Caribbean community has placed on the institution, which is to provide support for our borrowing member countries to address this challenge of climate change. A challenge that may be, in Jamaica we have a saying that if crabback never strong, he wouldn't gone under rockstone to live, meaning that this is an enormous challenge, but it is not one that we have control over, or perhaps that we have even contributed to. But it is one, nonetheless, that left unaddressed will certainly be very dire for our countries, and perhaps in some cases an existential threat for some countries. I want to turn briefly to the bank's 2012 to 2017 climate resilience strategy approved by the board. That strategy had basically two objectives, and you see them there on the slide: to operationalize an environmental sustainability risk framework for climate resilience, and to assist borrowing member countries and regional institutions to mobilize financing, design and implement policies and strategies and investment programs to address climate resilience. Over the last, the period of the strategy period ended this March. The bank has certainly made great strides with the support of its development partners, and in particular with the support of its non-borrowing member countries, who have certainly provided support for strengthening the internal capacity to address climate risk considerations in the bank's work programs. And there on that slide, you'll see some of the things that we have accomplished internally. Now the bank has undertakes routine climate risk screening for its investment projects. It does the same for the country strategies that are developed. That is the work program with our borrowing member countries. We have developed tools and guidance resources for our staff to help them to systematically address risk considerations in our work program. And we have also provided training and support to borrowing member countries. One of the key pillars of the resilience strategy was the mobilizing of concessional resources to support the financing of climate action in our borrowing member countries. And there the bank made significant progress. We initially got support from Canada, Germany, and the UK to flesh out our work program, support in terms of long-term consultancy services. Germany provided support to start our mitigation program with the development of an energy policy and the beginning of the start, I should say, of leveraging resources for funding mitigation projects. One of the key areas that the bank had targeted was the accreditation of the bank to the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund global finance mechanisms, with the understanding that given the size and capacity limitations of our countries, even though direct access was a possibility to these mechanisms, many of our countries, because of capacity limitations and the eligibility terms of these mechanisms, would not in the short term be able to access directly these resources for themselves. And so it took a year and a half, but last year the bank received accreditation for the Adaptation Fund, and in December the Green Climate Fund. It was a period of intense self-assessment, which showed that we had in place good fiduciary standards and policies and processes, but we also needed to do significant work on documenting our policies and procedures better, and to bring forward areas of areas related to independent authorities within the bank with respect to accountability, integrity, and transparency, things that we had on our agenda but would not have been brought to the fore without the accreditation process. So the bank's accreditation to the GCF provides for us to access resources of up to $50 million per project for Category A projects, to mediate green climate funds as well, and to work collaboratively with agencies such as the 5Cs, who also have accreditation to the Green Climate Fund for grant purposes. We also received significant resources from multilateral sources, and you have a bar chart there showing that over that period, we mobilized upwards of $300 million for adaptation and mitigation finance. And an important element of that is the work or the financing provided under the Climate Action Line of Credit from the European Investment Bank. And you would have heard today that we have signed a new line of credit with the EIB for 100 million euros. Under the original line of credit, CDB was able to commit all of the resources over the 5-year period. And through that process, we gained quite a bit of understanding about what it takes to address climate resilience in our investment projects, as well as our policy work with our countries, and some of them are there. At the country level, my colleagues on the panel will speak in more detail, but there are considerations of capacity, weaknesses in the borrowing member countries, the absence of a dedicated staff with the technical expertise to evaluate and assess climate resilience actions. At the project level, we found that incorporating climate risk considerations was not a very difficult matter as one would think, but one that was severely limited by data, absence of critical data at the project-specific levels that we operate, say for a dam, for water resources, say for building bridges and improving the resilience of coastal infrastructure, and we can speak more about that. And Dr. Leslie has alluded to some of the issues with respect to data the University of the West Indies and CIMH are working on. But I want to now focus on what it means going forward. Having gained this experience in the last 4 years, we have a better sense of what some of the things that we need to do. We also are now operating in a post-Paris Agreement phase where countries have taken onto themselves obligations, as they should, to contribute to the global good of reducing and managing climate risk. And on this slide here, you will see our country's greenhouse gas mitigation targets. And you will note that they are not targets of low ambition, given the fact, as I said, that although we don't contribute significantly as a bloc to to the significant levels of greenhouse gas emissions, we have committed ourselves to playing a role in their reduction. The area of significant concern for us as small island developing states is our ability to deal with the adaptation requirements for our countries. How do we, going forward as small island states, deal with issues that are already upon us? Our ability to have sufficient water resources for our population, for our tourism sector, which is an important, as you heard earlier, source of employment and productivity. How do we move forward? I've put in these slides to show the nationally determined contributions. This is the obligations that each sovereign state signed up to as signatories to the Paris Agreement. And if you look at the difference between the mitigation targets, that is greenhouse gas emission targets, which are very specific in terms of the percentage in reduction, and those related to adaptation, which would be issues related to managing our water resources and managing coastal defenses and so on, you will see that the latter have less specificity in terms of targets, in terms of exactly what we plan to do and how we plan to do it. And this gap in terms of determining how we move forward is where CDB and its BMCs in the next planning period will have to work together to find solutions about moving the needle forward. We have there a slide that looks at the constraints to do this, in doing this, and my Trinidadian and Belizean colleagues will speak to what it means at a national level. The way forward for CDB, as I've been alluding to, is that we have to find additional resources, notwithstanding that which we have raised over the last 4 years. We have to continue to look for concessionary resources to allow us to scale up investments in climate-sensitive sectors. We need to put considerably more effort and energy into looking at the capacity limitations in our countries. Much of the discussion yesterday and the day before spoke to the slow disbursement rates and issues related to project implementation. That is not confined to the other areas of work, but affects much of what we're doing in climate. So the strategy going forward has to, as I say, place greater emphasis on innovative instruments. It has to place at the center of our program work related to building community resilience, particularly in our rural areas where poverty is still a major challenge, and addressing as well the capacity limitations at both national and regional levels in terms of supporting regional mandated institutions to in turn support our borrowing member countries. What does it mean for our BMCs? I think it is extremely important that we recognize that although there are capacity limitations in BMCs, our borrowing member countries can and should take a greater look at how they might reassess and readjust the resources that they do have so that they can improve the performance with respect to planning, with respect to coordination mechanisms for implementing their climate resilience programs. What is also important is the issue of political will and commitment to get these things done. We cannot continue to have situations where we prepare policies which include proposed targets and for work, and they're not approved. They're sitting there as paper targets. So it will take, as the President said earlier, the courage to push at all levels, both from our end as CDB, as well as within our countries, to make the adjustments that are needed to be able to absorb the level of resources and support that are clearly well needed if we are to make a difference on the ground and a difference in terms of the objectives with respect to resilience that we're after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Let me then, at this point, I'm going to just ask three members of the panel here to give a first reaction, because after that, we're also going to get a specific country perspective as far as this whole matter is concerned. So let me then bring Yvonne Hyde in here now in the panelist role, Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Economic Development, Petroleum Trade, Investment and Commerce, and the Government of Belize.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, it should be working.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the opportunity of having me take part in this panel on a subject which is of critical importance to my country and to the region too. The thing is, Chair, Cheryl has outlined in her presentation practically all of the considerations that we as borrowing member countries of the bank need to look at in terms of getting to a point of being able to address the issues of climate change and what has to be done to make our economies resilient. She started out with saying that we have no control over the movement of climate, and we have seen that personally in Belize. However, she has said that it is so critical to find ways over the short, medium, and long term to work together to be able to address this and to address this reality. The points that she has mentioned are all points that we as borrowing member countries need to look at. And she has outlined a way forward, as far as I'm concerned, with regard to what CDB as an important development institution in the region should be doing along with its BMCs to ensure that the BMCs reach a level of development which allows them to have a level of comfort with regard to climate and climate change, and eventually leading towards climate resilience. I don't want to go any further at this point because a lot of what I will say in my country presentation addresses in more detail what Cheryl has referred to, but I will say that I think the bank is on the correct track. If the bank is able to come up with a new strategy which looks at the points that Cheryl has mentioned, I think it will be of great use to us. What is going to be important, and I'm speaking again as somebody as a citizen of Belize, what is going to be important is that we in the countries also work to identify where the gaps and the constraints are in terms of us being able to address these are very important issues. So I will leave it there at this point and then take on the comments later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well then, let me then invite the Honorable Camille Robinson, Regis, Trinidad and Tobago's Minister, to give a first flash reaction to the situation as outlined by the CDB.
Thank you very much, Julian. And like Yvonne, I am grateful to be on this panel, and I look forward to talking in a little more detail about what Trinidad and Tobago has been doing. I would like to indicate.
Sorry. Please use that. Yeah, I'm not hearing you, so use that microphone.
Oh, okay.
Go on.
You're hearing me now?
Yes.
Weren't you all hearing me before?
No.
I would like to indicate that the CDB definitely needs to be congratulated on the work that Cheryl and her team have done. And similar to what Cheryl said, though, I would like to express the hope that this does not become another series of documents that remain on the shelf. Some of you may remember our document years ago, Time for Action, that certainly remained on the shelf because there was the will of the CARICOM countries, the borrowing member countries, to get up and get things done that would have prevented us from being in this situation now, where we're looking at a new climate resilience strategy. That would have been prevented because as early as that Time for Action document, we talked about putting our countries in a position where we would have become climate resilient. As a matter of fact, Barbados was one of the first countries that hosted a climate conference, a United Nations conference on climate change, especially for the small island developing states. So what Cheryl has done is really put us back in a position where we have to examine where we are and move forward, not only with political will, but also with a certain sense of alacrity that we have to place within the populations of our region. The people of our region have to understand what this means for us as small island developing states, and we have to make a clear determination of how we move forward. As Yvonne said, when I speak on the work that is being done in Trinidad and Tobago, I'd like to say a bit more, but that's my first reaction.
Thank you very much. Let's then bring our European partner into the picture. And Pim van Bochum, please, let's hear your piece on this.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the floor. Short reaction on what the Caribbean Development Bank put to the table. First of all, we are glad to have such a solid partner in the region. We are doing business already with the Caribbean Development Bank since 1978. And this morning we signed the 6th operation. And I think this was the 2nd operation in the climate action field. So we are very proud to have such a partner. As announced by President Warren Smith, it was the first loan was 100% committed, and almost for 60% disbursed. So it was a high time to get a new operation agreed upon. I would like to introduce my institution, but I'll do that in the second instance. If the Caribbean Development Bank wants to work towards a new climate resilience strategy, you are always welcome to pick our brains. The European Development Bank is, despite the name, it's European, active in globally in 130 countries. So we have experience with certain challenges, either in the Pacific or Sub-Saharan Africa or even in Europe. We are not only there for the operations, we are also willing to share our experience and help you to have the most successful resilience strategy for the region possible. Thank you.
All right, let's then get to the country reports and return to Belize, to Yvonne Hyde. I'm sure your microphone is working already. Yes.
I don't like holding this thing. Thank you, Chair. Let me start by saying by indicating what our objectives are or what our commitments, our main goals are under the Paris Agreement. Our NDC commitments, the overarching goal is contributing to a 1.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature goal. And we also committed to 85% renewable energy levels by 2030. These two are in line with the Paris Agreement's objective of low carbon economies. We aim, even though we've said 2030, we aim to meet these prior to enhance the target. I should also mention that our commitments were made prior to the development of the NDCs, and the NDCs were used, that process was used to validate our national goals. We focus both on mitigation and adaptation activities in the NDCs. And I wanted to make a point that we have developed a growth and sustainable development strategy. And the NDCs, as well as the SDGs, are spoken to in our development strategy, the current one, which ends in 2020. I wanted to share that our mitigation potential is going to be influenced by the following four factors. We have a vast extent of natural resources. We have a large network of waterways and water bodies, including 16 large watersheds and numerous smaller ones. Approximately 59% of the country remains under natural vegetation, and 39% of the terrestrial area is made up of protected forests. And there are a great variety, as I mentioned, of terrestrial, marine, and freshwater ecosystems. Even though we have this in place, our socioeconomic growth depends on these resources for development and for livelihoods, for sustainable livelihoods, particularly in the agriculture and the tourism sector. So we have to work towards finding the balance between making sure that these protected areas are managed properly, as well as look at the development potential of these areas. We have a rapidly growing and a rapidly urbanizing population with over a third in poverty, and there is a largely unskilled labor force. And we have concurrent increasing energy demands. So we have these factors which we have to work with in terms of trying to meet our NDC commitments. I had prepared a presentation, but I'm only going to use a few of the slides. With regard to adaptation, we are focusing on various priority sectors, and I will just share a few of them with you. Coastal and marine resources, we're looking at resilience in agriculture, adaptation in agriculture. One of our critical areas is the whole matter of water resource management, and that's one of our highest priorities right now. Our tourism development is based on sustainability, so we are working with various of our development partners to enhance the tourism product or the tourism sector by making sure that whatever is developed is climate resilient. Our fisheries and aquaculture sectors are also being addressed with regard to adaptation. And as I think Cheryl showed in one of her slides, the whole matter of forestry and forest resource management. We have been working with the international partners and domestically, international partners including CDB and various of the other IFIs. And we have several projects which are ongoing right now. And I wanted to make the point that in all of them, we focus on the community level participation. We focus on making sure that the communities, the rural areas understand, appreciate what this thing called climate change is. It's all well and good to implement a project in a rural area, but if they don't understand and appreciate what we are talking about and what we hope for them to be able to benefit, then it doesn't make sense. So we do a lot of consultation. We've done a lot of consultation in these projects. And I will just mention a few of them. In the area of mitigation, we have funding both internationally and from domestic sources in key biodiversity areas. It supports forest protection, sustainable forest management, and institutional strengthening, capacity building, both for the communities and for the authorities which work along with these communities, including enhancing our environmental regulations. We've also just received funding for a readiness proposal under the RED+, and that is going to again help us in terms of looking at further improvement in forest management. Our marine sector, we have funding for, we are working in the area of marine conservation. We're looking at areas, at ecosystems based along marine areas, and making sure that these areas, especially with regard to the Belize Barrier Reef System, we're making sure that these areas are properly managed, sustainably managed. I mentioned before the whole matter of community level participation, and we do have funding, we do have ongoing projects with certain livelihoods, certain communities throughout the country, showing them how to engage in sustainably based activities. These are both inland and on the coast. We also are implementing initiatives in terms of energy resilience. One of the important aspects of in this particular area is the whole matter of capacity building. We find that the capacity in terms of building energy resilience, especially in the public sector, is limited, and this is what we're focusing on too. I wanted to share in particular one initiative which we are very proud of. It is called the Climate Resilient Infrastructure Project. 2 years ago, we worked with one of the partners with the World Bank, and we developed what is called the National Climate Resilient Infrastructure Plan. We spent about a year. We developed this plan in terms of helping government to decide what critical infrastructure they would focus on and how they would decide to focus on it. And the plan sets out a number of critical factors which need to be looked at to help us determine what we are going to do in the future, both in the medium and the long term, with regard to critical infrastructure and making sure that they are climate resilient. And out of that plan, which I was very happy to see at the time, it was endorsed by Cabinet, government took the decision, which was really the first time that I can remember where a cabinet decided, look, we will adhere fully to this plan, and whatever comes out of the plan in terms of investment, we will support. Out of the Climate Resilient Investment Plan came the Climate Resilient Infrastructure Project. That is quite a large investment, and we are focusing on one of the main highways to rehabilitate it, to make it much more climate resilient. It means not only rehabilitating the highway, but looking at drainage, looking at flood mitigation, looking at water resource management, and looking at the situation with regard to land around the road construction. It is a very important project for us. It is a new one because it has so many facets attached to it. There are problems with it. We have found that there are difficulties in terms of ensuring that the relevant stakeholders understand what is happening with the project as it is implemented. But we feel at the end of that, there is going to be a major highway which we can demonstrate will have all of the necessary climate resilient features. I wanted to spend a bit of time on the constraints that we face with regard to meeting our NDCs in various ways. And Cheryl mentioned some of them already. Across the board, we will have to continue working with our partners in terms of capacity building, education, and awareness, because we feel that adequate planning, both at the macro level and at the sectoral level, are key. And also public awareness in terms of what what is important for the country with regard to climate change. That has to be focused on. We also feel that the whole matter of research, we need to ensure that we have access to high quality scientific information, which is essential in terms of deciding how to move ahead. Also monitoring. Monitoring and evaluation, I think this might not just be the case in Belize, but M&E work in all of our sectors is weak. And we find that especially for this area, we are going to have to focus a lot on monitoring and evaluation of our activities. Coordination between stakeholders. We are also working on this in terms of ensuring that stakeholders understand, each one understands what the other one is doing, and that each of us understands what the various plans and strategies will focus on. And we want to make sure that there isn't duplication, to ensure that there is maximum use of limited financial resources. The other constraint, it's a continuing constraint, and Cheryl mentioned, is the whole matter of access to finance for climate resilient activities. Cheryl mentioned that CDB is credited to the Adaptation Fund and to the Green Climate Fund. In Belize, what has been happening over the past couple of months is that we have been approached by several of the IFIs asking us if we wish to work with them to access the Green Climate Fund for a particular activity. What we're finding is that some of our public sector agencies and even the private sector, we are not totally sure. We're not totally sure of exactly what we need to ask each IFI for. And so what we've said to those who have approached us, give us a chance to discuss internally what we think would be the best approach to use with each IFI. We understand that there is climate finance, there is finance available, but we are not sure that it is going to be very easy to access. And I think it's even more difficult for our small countries to be able to be certain that what we want to access is what we should be accessing with the IFIs. We are preparing a national adaptation plan to address these gaps and needs within the context of the NDCs. And I wanted to end by saying that if we are to move in Belize from our targets to implementation and to achievement of our NDCs, these 4 things are needed. I mentioned before significant planning, proper planning, and proper coordination. I can't overemphasize this enough. Political leadership, Cheryl mentioned that if there is not political leadership, if there is not political buy-in to what is important in terms of us being able to meet a commitment which we made international and which we made for the good of the country, then we're going to have problems. There also needs to be, as we have determined, clear governance. There needs to be clear governance, a clear governance structure within the country, within the economy, for us to be clear, to know exactly who is doing what. And I mentioned before, I just mentioned the matter of financial strategy. And this is something which we are discussing internally now, but we know that we will have to come up with a clear financing strategy on just what we want to access. And along with that is the whole matter of the absorptive capacity of my country, which goes back to some of the other points I have just made. We have to be clear. It doesn't make any sense for us to have funds to get a project approved and we are not able to implement it. So along with the whole matter of a clear financial strategy, the whole matter of significant planning, we have to be clear that we can absorb these funds within time frames which are set. I will stop there for right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there's the country report from Belize. Thank you very much. Now let's look at what has happened as far as the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is concerned. And here we bring back Minister Camille Robinson-Regis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would like to indicate from the outset that Trinidad and Tobago has its vision to the year 2030. And the vision aligns very well with the SDGs. As a matter of fact, we had a recent mission from the United Nations Development Partners where they commented how closely our vision document aligns with the SDGs. One of the thematic areas in that document is placing the environment at the center of social and economic development. As a consequence of that, Trinidad and Tobago has, since 2009, determined that our nationally determined contribution with regard to reducing cumulative emissions in the transport sector, the power generation sector, and industry sectors will be at the rate of 15% below the BAU. And that is to the year 2030. For Trinidad and Tobago, though, it's a little difficult, and the word that comes to my mind is it's a little schizophrenic for Trinidad and Tobago, because we continue to be perhaps the most highly industrialized of the countries within the region, and yet we are convinced that we also have to do the environmentally sensitive thing. But it is difficult for us because we want to see development take place in the country. We want to be able to use the energy resources that we do have, but we also want to ensure that we meet the set targets of the Paris Agreement and of the other agreements to which we are signatories. As a consequence of that, we have determined that there will be 3 areas that we have to pay special attention to and to focus on. And those are the natural resource management, waste management, and the built environment management, all of which affect the climate change agenda. We have already presented our climate change policy, and with regard to the reduction, the nationally determined contribution, that has been presented to the Parliament, and the policy, which was formulated since 2009, has been adopted by the Parliament. It was adopted in 2011. In terms of natural resource management, recently we presented to the people of Trinidad and Tobago from the IMA our State of the Marine Environment policy document, which looked at the state of the marine environment as of the year 2016. The determination is that the marine environment is at a state where, because of the industrialization of the country, there is consistent pollution of the marine environment, with the result being that, and it's not just the sea, but the waterways, with the result being that the mangrove has started to be deteriorated. Our seagrass beds have also deteriorated. There is pollution of the coral reefs, and the result is that we have determined that we have to set up an integrated coastal zone management strategy, and we have put together a team that will involve various ministries, including the Ministry of Works and Transport, which has the responsibility for coastal zone management, the Ministry of Planning and Development, which includes the environment, and the Environmental Management Authority, and the Tobago House of Assembly. With particular reference to Tobago, which is the smaller of the 2 islands, coastal zone management has become particularly, it has become an area that is presenting particular problems for that island. Because right now, the coast is being very severely eroded. As a consequence of that, we have been talking with the CDB about working with us as a government to ensure that that erosion does not result in the detriment of an already built environment that exists on the coastline of Tobago. In addition to the fact that industry plays a major role in Trinidad and Tobago's development, we have therefore resolved that going forward, we have to look at exactly how our industries operate. We have determined that we have to move to a situation where the industries that exist now become more adapted to the climate situation, so that what they do produce as their waste products is not as harmful and as hazardous to the environment in Trinidad and Tobago. In that regard, we have moved to engage the United Nations to work with us on reducing the persistent organic pollutants, and they have already started that work with the government of Trinidad and Tobago. We have also already started moving to using CNG as a fuel, so that in the public transport sector, the fleet of buses, the recent influx of the number of buses that we have brought in over 35 buses that use CNG. In terms of the maxi taxi or minivan operators, we're also giving them incentives to switch to CNG. So that will improve the level of emissions in the transport sector. Regarding our built environment, we have been also giving incentives to our business people to look at new ways of developing land use, so that the use that they put to the land is more climate friendly and more able to engage a resilience strategy, so that the use of the land is not done in such a way as to denude our forests and the hillsides. Of significance, recently the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries put 1 million seedlings of forest cover, and we are now planting out those 1 million seedlings. We had a target of 1 million seedlings of hardwoods and of fruit trees, and we have started planting those out on the foothills which had already been denuded. So reforestation is a major part of our strategy that we have put in place. Trinidad and Tobago, as I indicated, has a very complex decision to make, because we are not going to stop industrializing, but we do recognize that the industries that we do engage from henceforth have to be clean industries. The mere fact that we are now using natural gas to produce our electricity is a clear indication that we are moving in that direction. We have also committed to banning the use of styrofoam, but we have the challenge of the fact that we have producers of styrofoam as part of the industrialization of Trinidad and Tobago. So I go back to where I started, that there is a little bit of schizophrenia with regard to Trinidad and Tobago, but we're moving in the direction of ensuring that by the year 2030, we will have achieved our nationally determined contribution. We will have achieved a certain level of environmental sustainability, but we will continue along the road of industrialization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I mean, from what you heard, there's so much work going on in this across this region, and I want to make it very early, give you an opportunity to comment and pose questions from the floor, because I think that you really need to be part of this contribution. If you have things to add to the strategies outlined here, or you want to query some of the things that we presented, so please feel free to move to the microphones and pose your question and comment. In the meantime, I want to ask our European partner, based on what you've heard, I mean, I know you made a big offer just now to support any new initiatives, etc. But you also wanted to have an opportunity of introducing your organization and spelling out some more of the kinds of things that you can do in partnership with our region.
Yes, thank you. As I said, the European Investment Bank is operating globally. We are present in this region, in each and every country by the EU delegation, because we are the financial arm of the European Union. But we have also people on the ground here in Santo Domingo and Barbados. So whatever problem you want to tackle, please contact us. Next week or the week after, we are having a discussion this morning this afternoon with the minister, and we are immediately following up. We have three priorities for the area identified. First of all is private investment, and trying to stimulate the private sector to come on board. Secondly, infrastructure, to make infrastructure also climate resilient. And thirdly, it's the climate action operations which are identified by our bank as priorities. And they are linked with one another, because as we heard from the ministers just a minute ago, those challenges to mitigate the consequences of climate change are huge, and I'm pretty sure that that cannot be realized only by budgetary means, and that means that banking and financial institutions like mine, like the Caribbean Development Bank, but also the private sector, pension funds, and what have you, have to be encouraged to join forces, because only when we are working together, closely together, as financial sector, as governments and commercial banks, that's the only way we can accomplish the COP21 objectives. Otherwise, that is not feasible. One other issue to be added: of course, we are great for solid partners in the region, like the Caribbean Development Bank, and I hope this loan, which we signed this morning, of 100 million will be disbursed soon. But rest assured, the bank can also operate directly to clients. We finance, on average, 50% of an investment, so we are dependent on all other partners in the region, but we can do that directly or indirectly with the Caribbean Development Bank. Each and every information is on our website, but we are happy to exchange addresses and phone numbers in case you need us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, here's our first contribution from the floor. Welcome, sir.
Yes, thank you. I would like to thank the panel for a very thought-provoking presentation. But most of the conversation has been based on technical, scientific kinds of arguments, and I was wondering if any of the panel members could share any thoughts about making the economic argument, because I think one of the challenges we face in trying to convince the extra costs associated with implementing climate change adaptation measures on projects has been to demonstrate effectively that these costs will save down the road. And I was just curious if any of the institutions are doing work on that. I don't know if the 5Cs could speak to that issue. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you, sir. Dr. Leslie, will you take that on?
Yes, I had stopped earlier because I wanted to hear from the other panelists. One of the things that we recognize very early is risk, and that brings you back to the economics of things. And we at the center have developed a tool where, and it is a tool for policymakers, people in the Ministry of Finance, in the private sectors, and so on, where you can look at the project, and it's a tool that can be used to give you an assessment of what are the implications, what are the cost benefit by doing certain things, what is the risk level. And I'm very pleased to say that with the support of the Caribbean Development Bank, the USAID, and the UK DFID, we have been running courses. And I'm very pleased to say that there are 2 governments at this point in time that has made it mandatory to their ministries of finance and people who are planning projects to use it. Without that, their projects will not continue. So we are hoping that all governments will be able to use this tool. And I would like to say in this sense, when we were launching that tool called Sea Coral, the CDB had sent one of their personnel to that initial launching. And after the first day, he sent back a note to CDB to say that it's a tool that they should use in assessing all projects before they are approved. And I'm very pleased to say, because of that, they provided funding to help train other people. So in that sense, yes, we have several tools that we are using to address the risk level, the cost-benefit analysis, and all that stuff. So it is being addressed through that. But I would like to also pause at this point and ask, as I mentioned, we have 2 other people in the group. And I would like to ask Dr. Taylor, Professor Taylor, to tell you some of the analysis that is being done to address some of the economics through the modeling that is being done by his group. Dr. Taylor?
Thank you very much. One of the things that we have within the Caribbean region, have recognized within the Caribbean region, is that, boy, the kind of response that we need to climate change has to be evidence-based, has to be scientifically sound, it has to match certain criteria, which is context, it has to be relevant, but particularly with respect to scale. And so a lot of the work we have been doing, especially to begin to answer some of the impact questions and related to the economics, is looking on the matter of scale. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the climate change data and results that we have for the Caribbean region are at a scale that are way too large for individual islands, but certainly way too large for the sub-island scale, so the watersheds and the livelihood scale, where a lot of the economics matters. And so we've been doing quite a lot of modeling with a number of our partners across the region, certainly in Jamaica, certainly in Barbados, with Belize, Trinidad, to try to get down to that scale. Once we can get down to that scale, you can begin to look on, for example, what is the additional climate change factor? which I think is where what you need, especially if you're going to look on the economics of climate change. So there will be the impact due to natural variability, and there will be the impact due to just the timescales of other varying factors. But you need that additional climate change impact, and you need it at scale, and that's where the kind of modeling work and scientific work is the emphasis exists.
At the Institute of Marine Affairs, they have been using that kind of modeling in order to determine two things: the impact and as a matter of fact, the model shows what had happened previously and what the impact has been over a certain number of decades. And it has been making a significant, it has been significant for us in determining at the Ministry of Planning and Development how these various issues have been impacting various societies and also the built development. It has made a significant impact, and the data management is really very important as a developmental tool.
Can I react to
Yes, certainly.
because as I understand it, the question was how can we convince our people to bear the extra costs of reacting to climate and climate operations. I think that is not a real concern. I think the biggest concern is that if you don't react, the costs are even greater, and the challenges are probably too challenged to overcome the problem. So I think we all have to react now in order also from a cost-saving perspective.
Thank you, sir. From the floor? Speak. No, it's not there.
Hello. Yeah, I'd like to thank the panelists for excellent presentations. Something the Vice President EAB didn't mention when he spoke, and I really want to thank him for that, is that with the intervention of the EAB in the region, we now do climate vulnerability assessments on all infrastructure projects as a matter of course. So that certainly will increase and improve the resilience of the infrastructure funded by CDB and certainly other donor agencies in the region. But to the point which my colleague raised, and which is one that we really do face, and I appreciate the intervention by the Vice President of the EAB. We often hear from some of our member countries that with the passage of the next catastrophic event, the infrastructure is severely impacted, you know, and perhaps we need to relate real examples where adaptation measures have resulted in the infrastructure being more resilient. And we actually do have an example from just, I think, the past 2 weeks, whereby they would have suffered severe torrential flooding, and we are advised that the farms, the banana and pineapple farms in both Portland and St. Mary certainly stood up to the flooding as compared to many other farms which did not invest in significantly improved and enhanced drainage facilities. And I suppose my query then would be, perhaps to Ms. Hyde from Belize, how do we get that message across? We know Belize has a significant farming community, significant agriculture is a significant portion of the economy in Belize. How do we get that message across that this is a real-time example that occurred and that could significantly benefit something in the development community? We like to talk to each other because we use the same scientific language, but we need to get the message out to others.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Daniel. When the previous first follow on what the Vice President of the EIP said. Approximately half of our country, the northern half of the country, I'm using an example as a way of showing if you don't do certain things, certain consequences will happen. Approximately the northern half of the country, which is where the sugarcane belt is, suffers from drought. And over the years, over the past couple of years, we have witnessed extended periods of drought. And also, when the hurricane season comes, we have also witnessed extensive rainfall. So you have both, you have the drought and you have the rainfall. Of late, we have been working with the stakeholders up there, and they have been asking government and other agencies, what can we do to ensure that we save our sugarcane industry, we save our sugarcane crop? And the answer came right away. Drainage, irrigation. Right? They realize, and we realize too, that to invest in this sort of thing is going to be expensive. Especially, and maybe Dr. Leslie can speak more to this, especially since for us to understand where we need to put irrigation in the northern half of the country for the sugarcane belt, we have to get into a very expensive investment with regard to line, and we have to get a set of maps. We have to start off with the maps. And that is something which the government will have to look at. But when we spoke to the Cape Farmers, when we consulted the I think we all understood that if we did not look at drainage and irrigation for the northern half of the country, which is dry, and in some cases when the hurricane comes, it does come flooding. And if we don't look at these realities, the industry is going to suffer. So I have to agree with the Vice President of the EIP. I don't know if it is that difficult to make the argument. We have witnessed several instances of events, extreme events, which if we do not do something about them, we are going to have more reaction and more problems. So I think there is a clear understanding in Belize that we have to make the additional investment. We have not had, from various consultations, from various stakeholders, we have not had the reaction when we do something. This is too expensive, even from the politicians. This is too expensive. We can't do this. The reality has been, the realities are there, and I think the acceptance has been established that we need to look at these sorts of investments. So I think for the future development of the country, the political directorate has already bought into that. Now, it's going to mean, however, that as time goes by and as the individual activities are identified, and bearing in mind the fiscal constraints which we currently face, that there is going to have to be a continuing dialogue. But I don't know if we have to spend an extreme amount of time selling the point that the returns from these investments are going to be substantial. Because it is visible, we have seen the results of these extreme events. And this is the reason.
Dr. Leslie,
Yes,
you want to follow up?
I want to expand a little bit on what Mrs. Sai just said
Yeah.
in terms of the what is available at this point in time. And it gives me the point of introducing the work that is being done at CIMH. Because one of the problems, say, like in Belize or in Guyana, and I'll give you the example in Guyana. Some years ago, the conservancy was threatened with too much water. So the next year they say, okay, we will release water because we expect the rainy season to come. The rainy season didn't come. So as a result, the agriculture suffered. Now CIMH has developed a tool where they can provide the short term, and by short term I mean 3 months in advance of the likelihood of a drought or extreme rainfall. And so the farmer can plan better to be prepared. And I would like to ask Adrian to give this audience that tool that is available at CIMH, and which we want to make sure that our borrowing members understand and to use them. No sense developing these tools if they are not being used. And then I will also address the question of the case in Belize, where the CDB was providing funding for the improvement of the airport road between the airport and the Halover Bridge. And I would recall that CDB sent us the feasibility. And the first thing we asked, did they factor in the climate change issues, where this is at sea level rising, floods, and so on. So CDB went back to the consultants, and they had to do a complete rework. And then you can see the cost of not doing it, the cost of doing it, and the terms of the long term. So you could have gotten a good cost-benefit analysis. And as a result, that was incorporated in the design. So these are things that are already available to some extent and can be improved. And we'd like to ask Adrian to, where did he disappear to? Oh.
Disappear to the working mic, I assume.
To tell us about that tool, because it's important. And I will come back then to the question of the economic of things.
Thanks to the panel. If I can do this quite quickly. First and foremost, an announcement. That is that last week, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology was designated as a World Meteorological Organization Regional Climate Center for the Caribbean. It's the first in the Americas. So we kind of set the stage for the other countries in this region.
Other regions.
In this region as well. Because there are other weather and climate-related centers in North America and Central and South America as well. Now, one of the things I just want to mention quickly is that Dr. Leslie has talked about variability, and there's not a lot of discussion on that. When we talk weather and climate, we talk about what's going to happen tomorrow, the next couple of days, because that's what you hear on the radio and the television. We also talk about climate change a lot, because that's been pressed a lot, and we think about all the calamities in the future, and we talk about distant future. What about potential calamities over the next few months? That's where the rubber starts to hit the road. And that's what CIMH has been doing over the last few years. Dr. Leslie mentioned clearing the conservancy. When we provide what we call early warning information, it's supposed to stop errors like that. In that instance, Dr. Leslie, had that country known that 3 to 6 months down the road, there would have been one of the most severe droughts in the history of the Caribbean, would they have made that same decision? That's what our work is trying to prevent. To prevent us from making such costly decisions. So we work on a different time scale, not on the long term all the way to 2100 or to 2050, or what's happening tomorrow or over the next couple of days, but what's happening over the next 3 to 6 months. Right now, we are monitoring a situation that could cause similar conditions in that country, Dr. Leslie, because right now we're monitoring the potential of another El Nino as we approach the end of 2017. But in monitoring that, which is one of the things we do, we will update the region and provide forecast information on that scale, because that provides us with information for this different type of decision. A decision that you can't make towards 2100 or one towards tomorrow. But the type of decision Dr. Leslie spoke about. But I want to add that what we are doing is not driven solely by the natural or physical science. But what we do is being determined by social science work within CIMH. What do our clients, what do our sectors need? What has been working within our sectors? What hasn't been, in which case we discard it because it's a waste of our finances. What should we be focusing on regarding climate information for our key socioeconomic sectors? And we've actually started to publish papers in peer-reviewed journals on that. So it's not only the climate-driven, the physical-driven, but also demand by our sectors. And that's what is driving what we are currently doing. Because at the end of the day, when we prepare early warning information and forecast information, what we want to be able to do is provide impacts forecasts. Not whether it be more rain, not whether the temperatures will be warmer, but should it be more rain or less rain, higher temperatures, lower temperatures, what is the likely impact in our countries and within our socioeconomic sectors? That's the direction we want to go, and that's the type of support that we need financially as well, because we need to be able to sustain and advance the work we want to do. So I just want to put those points in. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Chair. One final note, Chair, is I want to emphasize when we talk about research in the region, what is being done. Because sometimes you hear, but we are not doing anything. It is being done, it is just that we are not getting it out to the right people. And therefore, I want to take this opportunity of emphasizing that's one of the roles of the Climate Change Center, is to get this type of information out on our clearinghouse website. And we work very closely, as I said, with the group in Mona, the group at Cave Hill, the group in Trinidad and in Suriname, as well as the other groups where we do within our group the cost-benefit analysis using the long-term information from Dr. Taylor's modeling or the short-term variability inputs that we get. And we hope that from this point on, those information will be used more effectively.
Yes, as a banker, we were discussing costs and prices. Let me assure you that our pricing is quite competitive in that sense. And especially when it is a climate resilient operation, we can even give interest subsidies. Our motto is lending, blending and advising. So lending, not only the long tenors, but ultimately pricing is quite interesting. Blending, we have blending facilities with the European Union, and we have advisory services and technical people around to support you in your operations and make operations bankable. I could do a similar thing as Dr. Leslie thing and ask Floris Vermeulen, if you want to be more specific on pricing issues, but that can also be done bilaterally.
Fair enough. Thank you, sir. All right. Let me bring Minister Robinson Ridges back in here. A lot has transpired today, and I want to get a sense, as I go around everybody on the panel now, your final thoughts towards that new climate resilient strategy. Are we on a good path here? Yes.
I would say yes, we are. However, I would make the point that a lot of the information is kept secret. I mean, clearly from what Dr. Leslie said and his